Hi everybody, I'm Phil Fatica. Welcome back again to the Millcreek Government Channel. It's Channel 9. We get to talk to some terrific people, and today is no exception. I'm sure you've heard a great deal about the phrase, Destination Erie. This is the man who knows everything about that. This is Michael Furman. Michael, thank you for joining us.
Well, thank you,
Appreciate
Phil, for
it very
having
much. Destination Erie. What is it? Well, how do we have many thousands and thousands of viewers? How do they get involved with helping you do this, make this go?
Well, the first thing we have to set straight, it's a regional vision.
Yes.
So Destination Erie is a term that could apply to a lot of different things.
Okay.
Particularly when someone thinks of Destination Erie, they think of coming to Erie, Pennsylvania. But the colon and the phrase really kind of explains the whole concept behind this comprehensive plan that we're trying to put together for the next 3 years, and that is, it's a regional vision.
Where do you want us to go?
That's correct.
Here we are. We were here.
Right.
Where are we going out here? And how are we going to get there?
Right.
And you're asking everybody. I think one of the things we had a conversation about this a couple of days ago. You're looking from the bottom up, not the top down.
Well, yes, primarily.
Yes.
That's true. It's called capacity building.
Okay.
It's trying to get the pulse of the region, and we need to kind of define what that region means first. The county received a grant from, it came through the agency of HUD, Housing and Urban Development, but it was an unprecedented relationship with the Department of Transportation and the EPA. Mm-hmm. When the Obama administration came on board back in 2008, they did something quite unusual. When municipalities are asking for support from the federal government, they have to go to whatever agency works in their area, and there's cycles. You know, there's an EPA cycle, there's a DOT cycle, there's a HUD cycle. And so the idea came together, says, well, you have these three silos that provide generally the resources for those municipalities, sometimes the regions. What if we took these silos and aggregated the money, and we said, look, let's start funding opportunities in the region to basically do two things. And what are those two things? One, creating jobs, but equally important is the quality of life. And you do it in a way that is sustainable. And sustainable, you know, Phil, we'll probably look back in 20 years and go, oh yeah, that was the word that they used back then. But sustainable development means really to address the immediate concerns that your municipalities or your regions are facing, with the idea of creating a structure that when we go down the road next 15, 20 years, you're going to have a system that will be able to absorb some of these conflicts that we have no control over, you know, carbon emissions, et cetera, in such a way that it's beneficial for the region. So in other words, stop picking the low-hanging fruit. Let's take a look at it from the perspective of what do we need to do now to create an environment and create an economic strength to last for the next 25 years.
Can I ask you then, let's get a little bit more specific. What are people telling you? What are the groups telling you? Are you at liberty to
Sure,
discuss
absolutely,
that?
yeah.
I mean, this is all fine and it's like wonderful abstractions of words here, but when the rubber meets the road and the people come to you, what do they want to happen?
So this is a good question.
That's why I get paid the big bucks.
Yeah, that's right. So what we've been able to do is we've had some public meetings, and you're absolutely right. It is a grassroots, it's a kind of capacity building. We need to create a baseline of what people in our community, when I mean by community, we're talking really Erie County. Now we're also talking about Ashtabula and Chautauqua, Warren and Crawford. Those are the 5 counties that we're working with, but primarily this grant and this comprehensive plan deals with Erie County. So in order to get a baseline so that when the program is done and ready for implementation, you would have had all the people in Erie County say, this is what I believe. The disaster would be to go down the road and say, well, here's the plan. And then you have the community say, well, wait a minute, that's not what I think.
That's not what I said.
That's not what I think. I don't have what they call skin in the game. I don't have stakeholders that are going to invest and implement it. So what we've started to do is create programs and opportunities for people in the entire region to come and to basically understand where we're at, understand the challenges, and then go through a kind of program that says, this is what's really important to me in my municipality. You know, I could be in Corey. What is it about Corey or Union City that I cherish, that I don't want to see disrupted? I want to actually build on those assets. At the same time, what are the things that are immediately threatening us? What are the things that are, could be education, could be transportation, could be land use. What are these challenges we're having? And so you have a kind of a priority of this is what I want to keep, this is my identity, these are our challenges. And then you look at these two things and says, okay, now how are we going to reach that level where we can actually address these and share resources so that we can create what we want to create for the municipality, but also importantly for the region.
What about those people that say, and let me be the devil's advocate here,
Sure.
leave me alone, I'm fine.
Oh yeah.
Don't bother me.
Absolutely.
I don't want to be a part of your great, glorious plan because I'm fine as I am.
So we're going to flounder. End of story. That's really important to, and I know that's kind of maybe a little bit too blunt, but all around the country, in fact, Ohio, Northeast Ohio and Buffalo area, they are also on the same track. They are like Erie. They have a grant from the federal government that actually looks at regional development. If we sit and just kind of coast and say, hey, you know, I'm not interested, then what are we going to be left with? We're going to just not really be able to navigate. The objective of this is to basically to pull the sails up, put the rudder in, try to create a map and say, okay, we need to navigate this. We need to think about where we're going to go. How are we going to get there? Is it education? Is it job training? Is it the way that we share land? Is it you know, how we look at the region in terms of where are the resources? Where are people working? So once we start having this dialogue, that's when the kinetic relationship of skin in the game starts to happen. And Phil, that's the thing that's very interesting in this process. There are a lot of conversations happening in our region.
Oh,
a lot of conversations.
We have 37 municipalities in Erie County alone.
That's right. The goal of Destination Erie, a regional vision, is to interrupt that conversation and say, okay.
They must love you.
Well, you know, I'm from a family that says, you know, very robust people. Yes. You know, we work hard, we play hard, we party hard.
Yes.
But really, we're interested in the community, our neighborhood. And what I mean by our neighborhood, I do mean Erie County, because we're all connected to this.
Oh, sure, yeah.
So you really, and you interrupt this conversation at your own peril, as you say.
Okay.
Let's start having, so let's take the waterfront, for example. So the waterfront is moving along, and it's done great. I mean, there's a lot, but let's have a conversation with the community about what really needs to happen on that waterfront so it becomes a national destination. There are a lot of great ideas out there. So we have to start having this conversation. Here's another example. I met with Joe Cuyava. He's going to be serving on our consortium leadership team. I recommended he do that. He's great. So we're excited to do that. But in the course of our conversation, he says, you know, we're not getting a lot of funding from the federal government. We have to, like, you know, think about how we're doing stuff. So he's calling people up on the phone saying, hey, you down in Corey, you have a machine that we need. Can we borrow that? And do you have, we might have something that you need, you know, a grader or a bus or equipment. That's the very kind of conversation we need to have on a larger scale. That's the kind of conversation we need to have on our scale. So those are the important things when you start to interrupt that conversation. You say, okay, let's think about trying to get on the same page. So let's start addressing, when you went back to your first question, for example, okay, what are you seeing? What are the priorities? Right. Okay, so priority be education. Okay. And education in relationship. Education beyond high school? No. Or education, period? Period. Okay. Education, and that's a tough one because when you look at K through 12 and the public system, how much influence you're going to have. In a private area, you're going to have that influence because you can control it. The state kind of controls curriculum. So when you take a look at education, that seems to be one of the really important parts. What's communication's relationship to economy? What's education's relationship with moving people from poverty into the middle class? Now, when you take a look at that, what are we doing? How is that moving? Are we able to manipulate our education in such a way that it keeps in line and can feed economy? And that right now, that is a huge problem because you link that to poverty. Absolutely. You know, and that's just unacceptable. Unacceptable. Absolutely. And you know, there's three. I should mention this. When HUD basically wrote the guidelines. And HUD is not driving this, by the way. They said, here's our livability principles. This is what I think, you know, this is what HUD believes is an important components. So when you start to have your conversations and pulling this comprehensive plan together, there are certain livability principles, and they are infrastructure and transportation, economy and workforce development, housing and neighborhood, community facilities. That means, you know, your education system, your healthcare systems, et cetera. Environment. These are the principles that should guide you. But there are three main pillars that, you know, when you look at development and planning in general, it's environment, it's economy, and it's also equity. Equity in terms of not equal opportunity, but equity in addressing those that oftentimes are brought to the table and have value.
One of the things you're not mentioning, and maybe you're going to, but has it come up in the conversation? Health. Recently, as we're taping this, the Erie County Department of Health released a study that said, as a group of people, we're not very healthy. We smoke too much, we're overweight, we don't exercise. And there's too many of us that do those kinds of things. Has that come on your radar or not yet? Or maybe because that department, that hasn't weighed in maybe very much yet as those concerns, because those concerns to me play out with that old Fram oil filter commercial, pay me now or pay me a lot later, when you end up in the hospital with all kinds of illnesses that are specifically related to smoking, being overweight, and not exercising.
Right. I would say at this point that hasn't been a specific thing that's been discussed, but I would imagine in the work groups that we've developed with regards to the community facilities work groups, and when you start pulling in the hospitals and healthcare, they're going to start to say these things. Now what's interesting is that we have 5 work groups that are working, and the question came up early on, well, if we have these 5 work groups, what is the conduit that connects these work groups, because they're not all going to be singular. So we've created a system that allows work group members to move into the other groups. So for example, when you're talking about education, you're going to talk about economy at the same time. So those 2 work groups will start to work together. And through that will become a narrative. And that narrative will generate into a vision and a scenario of what we as a region want to become. What are our assets? Now, we just spent yesterday going to Northeast Ohio, and they have a similar program, and they're doing 12 counties. We're doing 5. So
so they'd go from the lake down to maybe Youngstown.
They go down to Youngstown, correct, Warren area, right. And we spent the day in Ashtabula. Why? Because Ashtabula is a county where it overlaps with Erie. So Northeast Ohio has Ashtabula and Pennsylvania. So we spent the day there, and it was quite interesting because what connects Ashtabula is that 4-mile stretch from the lake up to the ridge and goes 22 miles across the southern tier, and that is the grape vineyards. So these are so this is an asset,
which is a multi-million-dollar asset that extends all the way into eastern Buffalo.
That's right.
You know, beyond Chautauqua.
That's
even.
right.
I was amazed the number of vineyards that have sprung up in the last 8-10 years or so.
So how do we preserve that? You know, how do we take a look at that very delicate, you know, terrain to make sure that that's preserved? So we've talked. So our conversation, we've been talking to developers, and we've been also talking to those that are in that particular field, or agriculture. And what's interesting is that they both want the same thing.
Do people ever broach the subject of public transportation is really poor here? That's why I drive myself to work, because I really can't get a bus and, you know, other 30, 40, 50 people on there. Yeah, I know gas prices have come down, but you know they're going to go back up, you know. So I mean,
a lot of that's true.
Is that been on your radar too?
Absolutely. When we first started meeting with municipalities, that was one of the things, particularly when you go to the southern part of our county and you talk to Corey, Union City, and you move over to Albion and into Lake City. How do we get public transportation to allow us to come in and out of the city? Number one, but number 2, if I'm working, I have a job, and I need to have public transportation on a regular basis. So this is really interesting. So one of the work groups is called Transportation and Infrastructure, and Mike Tan from EMTA is one of the representatives on the on that work group. They are actually working with consultants to basically take a look at where do these 150,000 people work in the county? How do they get to what work? And how do we, as a public transportation system, learn to work with them so that we can provide that transportation? So that's a streamline that they're trying to do, but at the same time they're saying, well, we need then to articulate to that particular region. So when we're taking these people back and forth, public can participate in this process. This is all about communication. This is all about having
the public
a conversation.
should be in their input should be in here. Yeah, it shouldn't be the corporation, shouldn't be the GEs and the big Erie's Magnetics. You know, there's wonderful people there. That's part of it, but it should be. Everybody else should have a voice in this. Let me jump ahead to the city of Erie is making steps towards attracting the younger people to move back into that urban setting. Is that considered to be a very important artery for lifestyle changes?
That's it. You know, and that was a good question because I worked on an academic environment for 20-some years. And what I started to see as a trend was that a lot of these kids that go to universities, not necessarily trade schools, but universities, come from the suburbs. And they don't want to go back to the suburbs, a lot of them. They want to come to a city.
The vibrancy of the city.
Vibrant city, to be downtown, to have certain amenities, social. They're marrying late. They're dealing, so they have a much more time, you know, on their hands, and they want to come into communities that have those type of amenities. They'll look at an old house, they'll try to flip it. So you're already seeing that trend line starting to happen. How does a city or a region prepare for that? And I think, you know, the city seems to have done some things downtown and trying to make it a little bit more attractive. And it started with the Felipe administration. But how do you take that and move it forward? Well, you should probably have a conversation with the universities. How do we develop a relationship with the universities that may be beneficial for them as well as the community? For example, you've heard of AmeriCorps. Well, what about Erie Corps? This is a concept that came up in one of our conversations. You know, we have these blighted regions that happen downtown. Well, what if instead of, you know, Mercyhurst University saying, well, here's a check for $100,000 for the community because we're a nonprofit organization. This is our contribution. And that goes into the coffers. Well, why not take a look at maybe directing that resource so that you know where that money is being spent and working with these kids that are graduating, oftentimes with significant amount of debt, saying, if you provide and you live in this region, this you know, this area, this home, and we start working with the neighbors in relationship with maybe the police force or some social service agencies, and you start flipping some of these houses and creating community gardens, you start to have a beachhead, and in response for that, the college lowers that kid's debt with a commitment that after 4 years.
So there's a lot of ways to solve that problem.
There's a lot of ways to solve that problem, correct.
Okay. Yeah, that's really nice to hear that. I appreciate that. Job training, again, we are woefully behind because people quit school. No offense to any of the fast food people, but after a while, they get, that's not the dream job that they thought it would be, and it can be very difficult that they're undereducated for the jobs that are available. That's got to be part of the conversation, I'm sure.
That's a tricky one. That's you know, when you start to untangle that, you start to untangle a lot of social concerns.
Sure.
And
dropouts are.
You know, being drug-free, going to a test, being on time. The aspirations of wanting it versus, well, you know, I'm getting a check and I'm kind of fine with that.
Yeah, I'm good with that.
So there's a real mindset that has to be addressed, and that's a challenging thing.
Sure is.
But I think one of the things that we're trying to address with this conversation is how do you create a dialogue that inspires these kids to do that. You know, when I was going to school, and maybe certainly at the tail end when you were going to school, we were always said, well, we don't want you to be a plumber. We don't want you to work in the factory. We want you to go to college. And so, you know, the mantra in the high schools of, you know, well, you need to go on to get college. Right, but that was for a long time.
Exactly.
You were you're college bound because it was affordable in the 80s, and now
everybody was going, and that was a big mistake on my part. I went straight from high school to college, and I said, I only am doing this because my buddies were doing it.
Right.
And I didn't like it. I quit. I said, this is not for me.
Well, and a lot of our jobs were starting to go out when, you know, and a lot of the factories in the 70s and 80s started to, so there was a change.
But I did go back and finish, and I end up getting more education than all my buddies. But you're right, there's dignity in work. Not everybody's going to go to Yale and major in European art history.
That's right.
Somebody has to repair those iPads.
Yeah. So
somebody has to write the software for those iPads.
That's right. Not only that, but what we're seeing is that our unions, in at least some of the ones that we're working with and having a conversation through Destination Erie, you know, they're saying, hey, you know, we want to work with these schools to show them that this is a good job.
There's dignity in work.
There's dignity in it. It's
Absolutely.
a hard job,
right.
But the payoff is reward, and it helps the economy to reinvest in the infrastructure, especially in old communities. How do we come to terms with it? So it becomes, once again, a viable way to enter into the work.
Somebody's got to repair that roof or build that roof, and you want to get up on that ladder that's 100 feet off the ground and pick that asphalt up, shingles and walk up the ladder. You got to be a tough, strong person, but the money is there. It's going to be rewarding to you.
Well, and the schools need to be there. You know, Tech, for example, Tech Memorial. When I was a kid, you went 3 days, you worked. In whatever. So maybe we need to take a look at somehow identifying some of these schools, not just within the city, but within the region. How do we turn these schools into a viable way that it interfaces with development and for business, so that you can actually have a connection between graduating and going into the
Yes, what you're talking about is, I think, very exciting and very promising. Again, this is Michael Furman. He is the project manager of what is known as Destination Erie, a regional vision. So, Michael, we got a couple of minutes left, and you've broached so many subjects here about what's happening. Again, some specifics, if you would, please, as to what is keep coming. You talk to this group, and this group, and the three of them all say the same thing at different times. Are you getting any? It's lining up. They're saying, yeah, this is really the A. This is how we're going to aim the arrow here. This is really big here, and big here. We're not doing this well at all.
Communicating.
We need to what?
Communicating.
Communicating.
So how do you get private investors, public officials, key stakeholders in your region to come to the table, have a conversation about collectively, where do we want to go? That's primary. That's it. You know, interrupting that conversation to finally focus that energy to move in a way that's beneficial for everyone. That's what we're seeing overall. And you know, in trying to attract people to come into Erie, whether it's businesses or young professionals, as you said, is another thing. Erie, and I mean Erie region, to participate.
I like that idea that you mentioned, that the colleges seem to be amenable to the, well, if you give back some to the community, we'll forgive some of your
it's a matter of coming up with ideas that work for everyone.
Yeah, it goes against the grain. Thinking outside the box, I think they used to say that. Well, Millcreek is very successful, and I must brag on this. I live here. I represent them on council. CNN Money Magazine said that a couple years ago they were the 79th best community in which to live in the country. That ain't too shabby.
That's terrific.
And now 97. And interesting enough, as the Erie Times News reported, there's really no downtown region. You know, but there's Presque Isle.
That's right.
There's all this other stuff that people find extremely comfortable and say, yeah, I want to be part of that upward swing. That I like that. I like living here.
Well, Phil, you said it right there. Presque Isle is the definitive component of this region that no one else has.
No, nobody else in the state. And we all take it for granted. Did you go to the beach this winter, summer? Nah. What? You didn't go to the beach? We traveled 600 miles to go there. We don't care if the water's 63 degrees. We're going in.
But that's it. That's what we all share. We share that particular harbor, that natural beauty, that resource that we have.
And there is a growth coming out of that with the economic development. People are trying to marry with the people in Ashtabula to make this a booming port, and we're for them. Michael, we have 2 minutes left. You get the last 2 minutes. There's your audience.
Well, I would say if you're interested in participating or learning about it, planerieregion.com is how to reach us. You can reach me. I'd be glad to come out to your community, tell you what we're doing. You know, I believe in this process, or else I wouldn't be doing it. And there's so much resources that are here. It's about having a conversation with the community, because we're all in this together.
Absolutely.
Let's start thinking about how do we, as a successful community, learn to share resources through the region in the long run. That's
well
key.
said. Thank you, Michael Furman, for being with us. Do appreciate it. You're going to hear more about Destination Erie, a regional vision, as time goes forward. And if you'd like to be a part of that conversation, just follow what Michael just said. Thanks for being with us. You take care until next time. I'm Phil Fatika.